The other day, we're doing the unboxing of the Pilot RC Laser V3. This is the 103 inch. It's going to be my new freestyle plane. It's now time to get started with the build. Before anything, I wanted to go through the main gear we're going to be using for this plane. Pretty much everything here is actually pulled from a different plane. So I'm just switching to different airframe and I'm pulling all the gear. So there are other options available, but this is what I had at hand. For sure, for radio, I'm using my FreeSky system. This is the X20S, has been working flawlessly for the past couple of months. And that's gonna go really well paired with a TDR18. This is a tandem receiver dual band with triple antenna. It has an internal 2.4 plus an external 2.4 and a 900 megahertz. And that's gonna go with a small TDMX for basically additional coverage with the antenna, so antenna diversity. It also gives a bit of redundancy, but I think the main goal here is to get as many antenna directions as possible to get better reception. Interesting thing about the TDR18, it already has the dual battery, and it's able to handle pretty high amps. So if I recall correctly, this is able to handle up to 30 amps continuous and up to 60 amps instantaneous current. So this would go pretty well with our setup here, even though we're gonna be doing pretty extreme aerobatics with it. For servos, again, I'm gonna be using what I had in the other plane. These are the Futaba's AA701s. These are really fast servos, still pretty powerful, have worked pretty well so far. And the exception to that is gonna be the throttle servo. So for the throttle, we're gonna be using an MKS 1250. It's a pretty typical servo to use on this type of gas aerobatic planes. For the servo arms, we're going to be using the Pilot RC aluminum arms. Two different lengths, pretty much everything is going to be using 1.6 inches. The one exception is the elevators. So elevators are going to use the longer 2-inch servo arms. For power plant, I'm going to be using a DA120. Again, I had this in my previous plane, no issues at all. So the cool thing about this is that there's not going to be any kind of break-in period, so we're going to be able to have fun from day one. And that's going to go paired with the J&A engineering mufflers and a Falcon 28 by 9.5. That works really well for that kind of freestyle extreme aerobatics style flying. And that's pretty much it. Everything else that we need comes already included in the laser box. So let's get started.
Let's start with the landing gear. This is straightforward. I added some washers and used red Loctite in the bolts. The wheel axles come with lock nuts and are very easy to install and adjust to get very little slack and let the wheels rotate freely. The assembly of the wheel pants was also surprisingly simple. The pants have a snug fit on the carbon gear and their angle is pretty much set. You only need to drill the holes and install the included T-nuts. It is nice that I did not have to do any sanding to the pants, and everything fit perfectly. Finally, the fairings were secured with some marine goop. Next, I installed the rudder. It uses a removable rod as a hinge. It is pretty long, so after installing it, I cut the excess length. With the rudder installed, it's time to secure the tailwheel using 2 bolts with blue Loctite. The horizontal rod that attaches to the ball link was a bit too far from the bottom of the rudder, where the ball link sits. So I ended up giving it a bit of shape with 2 bends to bring it in line with the ball link. Time to work on the engine side. The engine box in this plane feels very solid and has thick wood, plus additional fiber reinforcement. I simply applied a small layer of thin down epoxy to protect the wood. The box already comes with the firewall at the right incident angle, and with the engine bolt pattern laser engraved. Now it's a matter of drilling the holes. After that, I threaded the engine bolts to create the thread in the holes, then added a bit of thin CA and let it cure. I also used a Dremel to remove a bit of material on the bottom edge of the box to make space for the mufflers. Now we're ready to install the engine. After doing a few tests with different standoff lengths, I ended up using a length of 29mm to achieve the right gap between the spinner plate and the front of the cowling. Based on past experience, I prefer to install the throttle servo on its side, so that the servo arm is in the same plane as the carburetor arm. I used the included wooden box to mount it. I just added some additional wooden pieces so that the screws have more material to grip to. After that, I did a few tests to figure out the best location for the servo. The supplied throttle servo rod seems to be meant to do a Z-bend on the servo arm side. I ended up using it as a choke rod, and used a regular turnbuckle rod for the throttle servo instead.
At this point, we have the installation of the engine and the throttle servo basically ready to go. A couple of things to note here. We are using a 3/4 inch servo arm. This helps us get pretty good servo resolution for the throttle. There's not a lot of space between the carburetor and the exhaust, so we have to put the ball link on the inside. We have to get a very specific size of the bolt so that we don't have any binding between the bolt and the exhaust. But with this setup, we have pretty good resolution. We have about 1/3 of the carburetor open when we are at 50% throttle stick. Basically, you have about 50% of the power of the engine develops in the first third of the carburetor. So with this, we end up getting a pretty good throttle curve just on the mechanical side, not even worrying about the transmitter throttle curve yet. At this point, I'm basically done with the underside of the fuselage. So we have the landing gear ready. We've glued these pieces in place using some of this marine goop. And then we've added some of this rubber with some CA. For cooling the engine, we've opened up here these areas. Pilot RC includes this piece that you just bolt with these 4 bolts. So we're gonna have some of the hot air coming out through here, and we've also added this 3D printed low pressure lip. I got this from Morgan 3D Printing. I've used this in the past, the same kind of cooling method with the DA120, and it worked great even with the very high heats in Sacramento in summer. So I'm hoping that this will work pretty well here too. Other than that, we already installed here the vent port that already comes on the kit. Pretty nice detail. So yeah, I think we're pretty much ready to close up the engine, put the cowl in, and get things moving.
Another nice touch from Pilot RC is the inclusion of a nice fuel dot in the kit.
At this point, I'm also done with the cowling. So with the Dremel, I drill these different holes. This one comes already pretty much defined from the factory. These two, I use the partial clear cowling that comes in the kit to outline the holes, transfer those same holes to the cowling, and then just expand to get to a point where we can relatively easily install the cowling with the engine on in the plane. Other than that, I also added a hole here to access the engine needles, another hole here for the choke rod, and an additional hole here for draining any potential fuel that comes out of the engine. For example, when you're trying to start the engine, to avoid fuel getting kind of stuck there on the bottom. Other than that, baffles already installed. So for this, I use some marine goop. It takes a while to cure, but the final result is pretty good. And then again with the Dremel, remove a bit of material until the baffles are pretty close to the engine cylinders without actually touching them. So yeah, right now the next step is just to go ahead and install the cowling in the fuselage.
With the cowling in place, it's time to install the propeller and spinner. The included spinner already has the openings for the propeller. I just had to drill the plate with the bolt pattern and we're ready to finish the front end of the plane. The airframe comes with a tube that runs through the back of the fuselage to easily route the rudder and elevator cables. Elevators and ailerons come already hinged and sealed from the factory. We just need to install the horns. All of the included horns are the same, with the exception of the one for the rudder. They all fit snugly in the factory slots. I just sand and scuff them. Use 30-minute epoxy and glue them in place. With the horns glued, it's time to install the servos in the wings and stabs. In this plane, the servos are installed inside the wings, in a similar position to the ones in the stabs. This achieves a better mechanical geometry, although the installation is slightly more time-consuming. To bolt down the screws, the use of a mini ratchet with a hex driver makes things much easier. To get my desired 38 degrees up and 37 down in the ailerons, I used 1.6-inch arms and the outer hull of the horns. For the elevators, I used the 2-inch arms in the inner hull, so about 1 inch and 3/4, and the middle hull in the horn. The horn limits the travel in the down direction, so I sanded down the corner a little bit to allow further movement. For the rudder, I used a 1.6-inch arm and the outer hull of the horn. In certain positions, the elevator was almost touching the rudder servo arm bolt, so I switched it to a low-profile bolt to improve the clearance and avoid issues. To complete the assembly, I just had to spend some time finalizing the programming of all surfaces, installing the included fuel system, and securing all the remaining items in the fuselage.
And we're done. This was a pretty easy build for a 120cc airplane. Everything went in without any major issues. Everything went as planned. The quick assembly in the stabs and the wings is also a nice addition. And I've already programmed throws and exponentials based on past experience with this type of plane. But after I get a couple of flights in, I will make another video detailing my setup, both on the transmitter and also on center of gravity. I'm gonna go put the batteries to charge and check the weather to see when I can go maiden this beast. Until the next video, happy flying!